welcome to your favourite environmental podcast in this election period, at the very least. Hi, I'm Andrew Glassford, and this is GND Media. I am, as ever, joined by two of the smartest people I know, at least in the Greater Manchester area, even if Alex lives in London these days, Alex King and Lucy Burke. And we are also joined by a surprise guest, a long-time listener, first-time caller, I believe.
Yeah.
Sam, Sam, how the devil are you?
I feel like I should be referred to as friend of the pod at this point.
Friend of the
At
pod.
what point do you become comrade of the pod? I don't know. I don't know what the kind of cut-off point is.
Comrade pod.
Yeah.
I suppose if it was going to be anyone, it would be you. Let's the first inaugurate. I can't say it. The initial friend of the pod, Sam Knight.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you. This week, because there is a passing of the baton, a changing of the guard, a shuffling around of the elites happening in the UK, we thought it'd be worthwhile to have a look at the manifestos and see who actually, how to put this bluntly, who gives a shit about climate change? Because I'm not sure if you've been enjoying the debates or any of the coverage. Not much is being said about it, apart maybe some promises that have been left on the kitchen table somewhere. So the four of us are kind of going to talk about big areas and themes where climate is involved and how the different parties are responding to it, and kind of work out of the baker's dozen of them which parties really understand what's going on in terms of climate change and what they're putting forward to the electorate. So we're going to cover a whole host of themes, and we're going to start with... I was going to have like a whole prop system where there's going to be like a spinning board and things, but I ran out of time and glue sticks. So I will just look at my notes. First off, let's start off with energy. Now, energy, electricity, heat, it's one of the biggest causes of emissions in society, I suppose, as a whole. So you would hope that the major parties would have some things to say about it. I think the best place to start is maybe with Labour's position and GB Energy. So, for a start, Alex, what is GB Energy? What's it meant to do?
Wow, nominally it's an energy company, but it's in fact an investment vehicle, capitalised with sort of 8.3 billion through a proposed windfall tax. I think what's kind of interesting about GB Energy is that because it's an investment vehicle rather than an energy company, it's sort of totemic of Labour's shift towards away from public ownership of infrastructure and towards a kind of, I guess, what you probably would describe as a neoliberal approach to economic management of public and private partnership. So rather than having what you had in 2019 in the 2019 manifesto to renationalise energy, essentially, Labour is essentially saying in this manifesto, we're going to leave energy infrastructure in private hands and removed from kind of democratic control. So in that sense, I mean, I don't know what other people think about this, but it seems like a retreat from the 2019 manifesto, where they've essentially pledged public ownership of energy. But then again, looking at some of their, I guess, more positive pledges, Labour have said that they won't issue any new licences to explore new oil or gas fields. They've said that they won't issue any new coal licences, and that they've also said that they would ban fracking. So, I guess it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think the point about GB Energy is that it's kind of, they're trying to say that they are doing nationalised energy without doing it, and it's kind of for the people that aren't going to go into the detail about their commitments to go, oh yeah, we're a real country that owns stuff, as opposed to kind of, like you say, kind of carrying on this idea that the private sector will kind of get on with greening the electricity grid, which it's doing quite slowly in comparison to other places. And then the rest of the energy, like, I'm not really sure what Labour wants to do in terms of, like, it's going big on offshore and onshore wind, isn't it? That's the point, I believe, at the moment.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm so disappointed. I mean, I wasn't expecting not to be
jugular,
disappointed.
straight for the jugular.
Sorry, but I mean, I was expecting to be disappointed. I wasn't expecting to be quite as disappointed as I am.
Yeah.
I think it's a very thin sort of manifesto, populated by words like tough and strong and super
Page.
and yeah, I think it's kind of, I think the big idea is GB energy. I think they're talking about some sort of high skilled green jobs. They're talking about sort of a gigafactories and so I think there's sort of contradictions there as well in terms of the overall approach to sort of the climate emergency and climate change, because a lot of the pieces don't fit together at all. But of course, that's not uncharacteristic of political parties or manifestos, is it? But nuclear deterrence, weapons, defence, not great environmentally. This idea of being a leader in terms of the automotive industry, and I think a lot about how that works in infrastructural terms and so on. I mean, I'm probably straying from energy, but I think GB energy perhaps, but if we're not doing anything about water, not doing anything about public transport, there's nothing really about public transport infrastructure. All of the things that you would need that would potentially be allied with a kind of shift aren't there in that manifesto at all.
Like I think it speaks to Alex's point that like it's out of all the things they're saying, like they're gonna make all kinds of new like NGOs and kind of commissions and stuff. GB Energy is the one that looks like it would actually do something, but then it's still actually basically a room full of money as opposed to a room full of engineers and people doing stuff, which feels like a wasted opportunity for me, in the very least. But that's just Labour on energy.
Good idea if it wasn't reliant on PFI and BlackRock is the new slogan that they're going on. The new slogan that they came up with today is "Let's get BlackRock to rebuild Britain," which feels flawed in many, many different ways. But the money allocated for Great British Energy, I mean, if you look at it year by year, is kind of like averaging 1.7 billion. I mean, this is tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of money.
There's some other kind of freaky stuff out there. The Greens have come out quite heavily against nuclear in their manifesto. How do we feel about that? Because I think I'm starting to be proton pilled, nuclear pilled. Like I'm slowly coming towards nuclear energy, and I'm happy to be battered away against it. So, what do we feel about discounting it at the moment? Not very much.
No, well, so I because I'm older than all of you, I grew up in the moment where people were genuinely terrified of nuclear energy. I can remember Chernobyl happening and people not eating spinach and things like that because of how quickly it took up rainwater and all of that kind of stuff. So I can remember that what it felt like to witness a kind of ecocide happening at the time. So I think there's a generation of people for whom that the kinds of dangers of that are really sort of experienced probably more viscerally. I don't know, kind of in a much more fundamental way. I think the issue with nuclear energy is in order things like in France when it was very, very hot, there were issues about being access to the water that was needed to cool reactors.
Yes, yeah. I remember seeing that. It was like the rivers were drying up around the reactors.
And so they had to be sort of, I think they couldn't be used because it was too you couldn't guarantee the sort of safety of it. So I think there are dangers as well to relying on nuclear energy, and I think I would very much prefer not to have to rely on it. I can see I can see some advantages of it, sort of in some sort of circumstances, but I think I'd prefer if we were using other more sustainable, less potentially catastrophic forms of energy. Personally,
I suppose it's probably
fair enough.
It's probably a question of time as well, isn't it? Don't they take years and years to sort of commission and to build and commission, and time's not really on our side at this point.
Well, they've been building Hinkley Point C, or is it Sizewell C, for 25 years, and it's still not built. So I suppose in a practical sense to come out against it, if you believe that you've got 15 years, 10 years to try and deal with the energy transition, building a nuclear power station is probably not going to be the top of your agenda. I was watching Navarra's coverage of the debates last night, and they brought up the Green Party's spending pledges. And weirdly, I found Navarra to be saying that the Green Party were being unrealistic about their spending commitments, which seemed a bit wild for me for an organisation that seems to believe in the climate crisis to not think that we should be spending vast amount of money at the same time. So I thought there is this kind of thing in the air about the serious politicians who have to make serious decisions as opposed to doing stuff to meet the challenge of the moment of humanity, which I found a bit strange. But other left-wing media outlets are out there. Support us on Patreon, like and subscribe.
I think a lot about numbers. Right, numbers are used in really interesting ways, ideologically and sort of rhetorically, by political parties, and because it's very difficult to understand what a big number really means, or how to compare a big number, or what a big number might look like, in a kind of durational sense. I think people can go, oh, well, that's a very large number, that's much too big, or that's an okay number. But I was looking at the Labour Party manifesto, and it says we're going to recruit 6,500 new teachers, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, so how many schools are there in the UK? So, and this is not including public schools. It's not this schools in the state sector, not schools for kids with additional needs. Yeah. There's 24,980 schools. That means approximately a third of a teacher for each of those schools, and it's like
over 5 years.
Oh, but yes, exactly. And it's like, okay, so that is. Might look like a big number, is not really a very big number in practice. So it's kind of, I think that's what manifestos tend to lead us into, those kinds of conversations where we say, oh, that's a nice big number, and that's a good thing, and that's much too big. But I think I think maybe we should reorient the way we think about it and say, well, what might we need to prevent a catastrophic existential threat that we're facing.
It's going to be fine, because we've got private enterprise that will create new technology which will allow us to segment those new teachers into 3 different people.
Exactly.
We're heading to the Simpsons PepsiCo education board. When you're doing your maths, it's like, Johnny has 2 Pepsis. He's really thirsty. How many more Pepsis should he buy? Which will be brilliant for everyone involved.
Just on the subject of big numbers, I mean, I must say I kind of was struck by this as well. That as far as I could see, the Greens were the only party in their manifesto to kind of challenge this cost of net zero narrative, which was to say that we're going to spend £200 billion or whatever it is over the course of next Parliament, and that doing so will create 50 to 70 billion in additional economic revenue every year. So, like, the cost of doing nothing. There's a cost of doing nothing rather than the cost of net zero. As far as I could see, I don't think any other party was making that case. On the other hand, sticking with the Greens, and this might be something we kind of touch on in a bit when we come to housing, I was slightly struck by the fact that they were promising 42 billion for a retrofit program over 5 years, which sounds like a big number, but probably, spread over 27 million homes equates to about £1,500 per home. and anyone will tell you that
right now
that doesn't touch the sides.
Like literally today, I was having some insulation put in my loft, and I can only assume the guy was getting paid like £1,000 to do it, because like it didn't seem super high quality. It'd be better than what I had previously, but yeah, that's not a lot, and that's even like, I love a heat pump, but they're expensive. So I suppose you'd need to spend 43 billion to bring those prices down at least. Like looking at the other manifestos as well, because unlike Navarra, we're covering all the election manifestos, guys. I'm coming out swinging tonight, apparently. Just really punching up. Sinn Féin haven't really said anything about energy. They'll put 4 million towards a just transition in Northern Ireland. Plaid Cymru, no numbers on their commitments to energy. They want to have full energy autonomy in Wales. Right now, according to them, they're capped at generating 350 megawatts of energy. I'm not sure if that's over a year or that's how much they're in total capacity, which feels a bit strange to put that on a autonomous region of the United Kingdom, to say if England can only generate so much energy people would be fucking outraged. I think
talking down our country.
Yeah, and then exactly. And then the Tories, well, they are very keen on carrying on with delicious oil and gas. So, like, where are the Conservatives now on this? Do you think they're just being a contrarian, or do they think by carrying on down this line of, we'll keep getting as much oil and gas out the North Sea, which there isn't much of, is them trying to demonstrate this like grown-up politics?
They know they're losing. Their whole manifesto is really long and quite dull. Their manifesto, right? But it reminds me of like when a film isn't very good and it has a really long trailer at the cinema, and like the length of the trailer is directly related to how bad the film is. So if it's a really bad film, the trailer will go on forever and ever, because it's like just to try and over-accommodate. And that's, I was reading through their manifesto and I was like, that's what's happening. It's like, there's quite a lot here.
When it's telling you about the Academy Awards the makeup team have got on their previous work.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of, theirs was a sort of, this is a common sense approach, wasn't it? That's that kind of idea, pragmatic approach.
Which find out what it says. It's the document's too big, Alex. I can't find.
Well, so they apologies. Yeah, well, if I remember, like they've essentially doubled down on no onshore wind, because the internal politics of their party is such that they can't build anything in the countryside or on the greenbelt. So they want to sort of increase offshore wind and offshore cabling, so as to sort of circumvent the need for substations. They've gone big on nuclear, so they want to create 2 nuclear stations, I think, and half the time it takes for basically nuclear stations to get through the planning process.
Which they're not doing great on so far, as we were talking about.
as we've alluded to. And I think they've mentioned a power station in North Wales, and then also have gone big on carbon capture, classically. So business as usual with big sort of like air sucking devices.
And definitely no sort of solar farms anywhere that any of their voters might be.
Like, do you think the oil and gas money is still flowing into the Tory party, or do you think that funding is shifting into Labour, and so they've just kind of gone, well, we'll maintain what our position was anyway, just in case? Because it's not very ambitious either way. That you look at it from a Conservative point of view. And then there was something else that they said, about they're going to put up more gas power stations as well. So I think maybe it's them trying to hold on to a constituency that's been, funding them for years and years, as opposed to having a vision for what the world is. And then finally on energy, we've got the Lib Dems. Anything to say on the Lib Dems, Sam?
Do I have anything to say on the Lib Dems? I mean, the honest answer is no. Or the only thought I had reading the Lib Dem manifesto, and I find it horrible that I have to admit and say this out loud, is that I did find it a more exciting read than the Labour Party manifesto,
Me too.
I agree.
It's more detailed. It's got some interesting things, particularly on like governance of climate finances. So it's talking there about like how it will approach issues around the treasury, structuring its approach to government. It talks about citizens' assemblies. It talks about proportional representation. It has like interesting stances on international development and international climate finance that are far more fleshed out than Labour's. And that's not to say that, you know, I've suddenly had a hit on the head and become a Lib Dem, but there is some interesting things in the Lib Dem manifesto, and it's not weak on energy by any means. They're pledging 90% of the UK's electricity is going to be generated from renewables by 2030, which is, you know, roughly in line with Labour. They have a slight fudge around windfall tax, so that they used the phrase one-off windfall tax, and even the Tories aren't saying that. So there's some sort of strange irregularities in it, but it's broadly in line with Labour's offer, and in some cases is doing better.
Like, where do you think they see themselves right now in terms of like they're pitching to be the second biggest party? You think? Like, there's been some absolutely mental polls over the last 6 weeks where, you know, the Conservatives might end up with less than like 40 MPs or 76, but then all we've seen from the Lib Dems, bless them, which is how I feel about Lib Dems right now, is just, oh, bless them, is Ed Davey doing various stunts like he's a Saturday morning breakfast show host. So like there's a bit of a mismatch there between them trying to be serious governance and him having to have a PR.
I mean, I think what he's done on care is really important, actually. Right, you know, and I think that the Lib Dem manifesto and the Green manifesto talk about social care, which I think is one of the biggest and most fundamental problems we have to address.
Yeah.
And we have to address it also because it's about the exploitation of labour. It's about unrecognised work, unrewarded, undervalued work, and it's about the kind of systemic, often kind of exploitation, largely of women, but often of women of colour, poor. You know, it's a really significant thing. It's so disappointing it's nowhere in the Labour manifesto. I think it is there in the Lib Dem and the Green manifesto, and I'm really glad it's there. And I hope that one of the things that they can do is put pressure on the Labour Party. But what concerns me a bit is if you've got a massive majority, then you don't need that to respond to that. And I really think that massive majorities are quite dangerous. But they're particularly dangerous if you don't use it to do the things that we need to do to protect people. Because, you know, I think it's fundamentally about values, isn't it? And it's like what matters to you, and is it profits and shareholders, or is it people and their connections with the you know, the sort of natural world and with other living beings in the world? And, you know, I'm for that conception of value, but that's what worries me is missing from the Labour manifesto at the moment.
I also think while we're praising the Lib Dems, I found it interesting reading all the manifesto to see what are the kind of policy fights that people are keen to have on climate. Because maybe 5 years ago, we were all arguing about net zero dates. And with the exception of Reform, who is proposing let's totally abolish net zero as a concept and you know, reject every agreement that we've signed, and the Greens, who are still in favour of bringing that net zero date forward, everyone is now confident that 2050 is the date that they're going for, which I personally think is a shame. But it feels like the debate has moved on and it's shifted to different things, that some of which the Lib Dems are quite strong on. So water is one of those. Aviation is another. I was genuinely quite surprised to see them proposing banning short domestic flights in the UK, and also talking about frequent flyer tax, which has become one of those dividing lines. So the Tories explicitly in their manifesto say we reject a frequent flyer tax, which I think is interesting and notable, because I, to be honest, wasn't aware that it was going to be such a important line for them to take. And if you look over to the Labour Party manifesto, they have very much allied themselves with the aviation industry, and they talk about supporting sustainable aviation fuel, and that's the kind of best that they can muster. So to be fair to the Lib Dems, that is a point of difference that they have with Labour, which is positive.
And actually, if anything, the only person that I felt human in this whole process is Ed Davey, talking about care and the care in his own life. Granted, you could argue maybe there's a cynicism to that in using it in the campaign, but it felt like a person who had real problems based in reality that I understood, as opposed to Sunak and Starmer, who feel like 1,000 miles up compared to everyone else. And when you see them speak to people, it's just it's peculiar to say the least. I'm trying to be nice to our future overlord. So maybe we should move on to the next segment. We didn't touch reform, but from what Sam's just said...
I read the Reform Manifesto.
You read it in full? We've all read them in full, Lucy. It was a very educated discussion. Please go on.
No, it's very... it's got some weird anomalous bits in it, like... sort of no more sort of interest on student loans and things like that, and removing the cap for medical students. The cap on the numbers of people who can go to medical school. There are these odd kind of, I mean, it's probably not surprising really in terms of where I think those politics are from, but these sort of moments in there, plus this kind of cutting foreign aid and utilising and unlocking our vast oil and gas reserves.
Well, yeah, the fact that they've decided to take the term net zero and now apply it to immigration as opposed to carbon emissions, kind of, I think, encapsulates Reform's positions on a lot of things.
I was struck by the one particular word in the Reform manifesto, which I think on climate. They talk about the net zero target being unaffordable and unachievable. And I think that word was really quite telling, because rather than just saying this is expensive, it's almost saying this is like impossible. Like it's not even worth endeavouring on as a sort of political project. And I don't know what everyone else thinks, but that seemed to me kind of like an interesting pivot, and one that kind of departs from the political consensus across the political spectrum, really. I mean, even the Conservatives, I think Sunak kind of gestures towards this with the renewal of Rosebank and the renewal of sort of oil and gas in North Sea. But I think generally speaking, certainly with Boris and possibly under Sunak to a lesser extent, there was a consensus that you would hit net zero you would keep it as a target. Whereas I feel Reform have really very clearly departed from that political consensus. And going back to that question of the extent of the Tory wipeout, if we do end up in a situation where the Tories go down to 40 MPs and Reform have 5 or 6, then I have serious concerns about the long-term opposition and where the net zero agenda goes under that kind of Braverman, Patel, Farage axis of evil, under an emboldened climate skeptic right. So I think it's worth reading the Reform Manifesto if people haven't already.
Yeah, bits of it are really scary, I think.
And it's interesting, like you say, Lucy, for those sort of populist hints that it has coursing through it.
I think there's probably a growing right-wing backlash to net zero and dealing with climate change in a way that would be just and support people through this huge, amazing transition in humanity, because it's going to be difficult and it will require a change in power structures and a distribution of wealth and resources. And it's to the point where it's easy for them to feed on the kind of doomerist side of everything than them to fight back against like the kind of positions like that the EU might have now in kind of an institutional sense of like, oh, we'll do these kind of carbon taxes and everything will be kind of technocratic and it's very much about bean counting. It's easier to go, well, it's all nonsense, isn't it? And we can't do anything about it.
Exactly. And I mean, Starmer, you've got to remember every week he's going to have to go up against the Conservatives and defend what he's doing on climate. And he is going to have to, I mean, it's an open question whether he has the stomach or ability to do that, I think, when it comes to climate change.
But I think the crucial thing, the really interesting thing is if I think about what's happened, say in France, where you have a quite a kind of sort of, I suppose, detached kind of figure in Macron who's implemented a lot of sort of policies which are sort of, I suppose, in the long run quite positive environmentally, but not put in any of the infrastructure that would enable the transition to feel like a just transition.
Yeah.
So you've got a situation where farmers aren't allowed to use herbicides and pesticides in the way that they are, say, in this country, which is good and it increases biodiversity. But then their produce is going and is being sold in supermarkets alongside produce which has been imported from places that do use herbicides and pesticides. And so the farmers who are very sort of strong in France are suffering as a result, kind of in terms, sort of economically.
Yeah.
And it's about really to address this, what you need is a set of is a kind of redistributive sort of total way of thinking about how you might enable practices to change, and that's why that's why it's interesting in terms of what you've just said, Andrew, because you've said, to do this you need sort of more redistribution and whatever. I mean, in fact, you could do it, and people might see catastrophe unfold and just not care.
Yeah.
And just sort of preside over a culture in which we get used to mass death.
Yeah, what was the thing in Ben Ware's book about the kind of was it nihilist laughter or something? The kind of the position where it might be moving to if we don't deal with these things in a more, I guess, positive way, or a way that's going to bring humanity to people.
Wasn't that kind of like an observation made by David Wallace Wells as well? He came on the show and I think he compared it to kind of COVID, where I think the gist of his argument was that we kind of accept the fact that 2 or 3% of the population dies from extreme heat, for example, in a particular in Europe, for example, and there's kind of, I guess, an acceptance, like you say, of mass death and
yeah,
and
a sense of life moving on and people just being okay with that.
But I mean, the interesting thing is there could be these spaces because again, I think I'm thinking a lot about things like food security, and there's a kind of potentially there's a sort of protectionism that's kind of connected to that could be appropriated by various different parties in different ways, but that kind of sort of in lots of ways what you would want is food security based on being able to produce and eat food locally and not be used sort of bringing in food from across the world, and something about sustaining and supporting agriculture, and there are these points where I think potentially things that might be important environmentally could be appropriated by different parties with sort of different politics and sort of understood differently. I mean,
because
I think
everyone loves the idea of getting food that's local to them. it's like it is baked into like society's psyche. Like when I was doing my climate jury at work recently, it was like one of their like top 10 recommendations was to have like a local farmers market, which in practice is actually terrible for farmers because of how supply chains are built up in the UK. Like it's really hard to sell your food locally, but it's just like one of those, common sense things that I should be able to go down to a farm and get a pint of milk off, Dave, the dairy guy, farmer,
Milkman.
No, the milkman's further down the chain.
Oh yeah, they just distribute. Yeah, they don't make it.
Which is very much like a A plus B equals C kind of framing of that, which I totally get. But to kind of pull us back onto the manifestos, talking about agriculture and land, because again that's something that a lot of the parties are having their manifestos, but hasn't really kind of come out in the conversation. Labour have said, let's not start with Labour, let's start with the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems have said loads of stuff. So they would introduce a national food strategy to try and ensure food security and tackle food prices. We're trying to support farmers doing like diversification through restoring of woodlands, peatlands, and waterways, and some stuff about kind of giving farmers and fishermen a better deal when it comes to kind of this supply chain issue. So, as the Lib Dem position is kind of like they understand the problems that were with the EU, and they want to kind of deal with that a little bit, but it's still coming from a place which is quite top down and technocratic. Like you'll get an extra 3% on your haddock as opposed to if you sell it here or there. And then they've got a lot of stuff about water, actually. Now, I thought water would have become a much more salient, pardon the pun, issue, like in this campaign. But I feel like it was initially, and then no one cares about it again. Like maybe I'm just kind of looking for despair at the moment. But the fact that you can't go into any river without, seeing human feces or an algae bloom is pretty bad. Are we not engaging with that because that's kind of put on a lower tier priority because food and energy and everything else is so high, or is it more of a disconnect from that? Do you think?
I think it probably speaks to the fact that as the campaign progresses, the messages become more focused, and
right, yeah.
I think at the start, if I remember correctly, there was a bit on water. Encapsulated perfectly by Ed Davies sort of flinging himself in Lake Windermere, and it was sort of cropped up in the sort of
so much E. coli from
what a trooper. Yeah, and it sort of it cropped up every now and then on the odd sort of panel show, and it is in Labour's manifesto, I think, as well. Stuff about blocking executives getting bonuses. It's a little more sort of toothless than the Lib Dem manifesto in less detail, but it is there. And I think as the campaign has kind of progressed, the two parties sort of dominate more, and their messages sort of focus around different issues, some of which we've touched on, but more broadly, more usually not stuff that we've touched on, and not really anything with an environmental focus. And I think even some of the most popular, I think it's hard to think of any environmental topic that's basically survived this long in the campaign, let alone water. But I think it was there initially.
I don't think the Tories have said anything about water.
Well, I wonder why.
But I feel like Sunak's position's been like last night in the debate, which I watched for 10 minutes before I dragged my eyes out, was like, I know you're frustrated with the party and you're frustrated with me, but we can do it, essentially, was his like position.
He's at the bargaining stage of grief, isn't he?
Exactly. To kind of finish off, let's finish with a little bit of hope, because it's really difficult and we kind of need it, because we're going to need people, actively fighting against whatever government comes in, because by the sound of it, they're going to be a set of shitbags, whoever it is. So we'll start with Sam, since his connection keeps going in and out. Sam, what are you hopeful for, and what do you want to work on in the future?
Well, I'm in Islington North, so the election for me has been quite an easy choice. Yeah. I've been out campaigning for Corbyn. I was actually abroad for 3 months, and then I came back 3 weeks ago, and have been doing this kind of on and off every week. And it's a really close race here. We might lose. There's a very, very real possibility that we'll lose. But one of the things it has really taught me is the power of people and good people getting involved in local campaigns. And, the kind of honor of activism is that you get to meet and come across so many wonderful, lovely, kind, generous human beings who sustain you and who give you life and support and propel you to keep on going and keep on fighting. And it's, I think like whatever the outcome for me in Islington North, I have a lot of personal respect for Jeremy, but I don't think, our ambitions are there. That's not the horizon of our ambition. The real fight for me starts afterwards. And so to be around comrades and around people who I have a lot of love and respect for, and to be bolstered by them, I think, that's the hope that I always return to is
You're asking me what I
find in all the brilliant people
about
standing
hope.
up and doing
hopeful
something.
about anything post-election, and what is keeping you sane in these boring 6 weeks?
I mean, probably really similar to Sam in that I'm sort of very committed to tenacity and effort and not giving up and not being defeated by all of the things that kind of come along and make life difficult. And because I think there is a horizon. I don't think we will, I think the point is you never get there, but you have to carry on proceeding as if you're going to, and in the hope that you will. And I do believe that, in the end, what we need and is a kind of redistributive, egalitarian, sort of hopeful politics, really, that recognises there is a way that we can survive what's coming if we are committed to each other. And I think most people are committed to other people and do understand the value of other people.
Yeah, totally.
The majority of people do that. It's just we're in this vastly unequal world where, some people have the kind of the power to produce them, these kinds of very different ways of kind of constructing things. So yeah, that I think my hope is that something is built, whatever.
Maybe like a movement, not like a pylon or something. Like a little piece of infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like some new copper wiring would be good, right?
Alex, come on, finish us off in a nice way.
I think it's maybe a bit of a left field thing, but speaking of the value of sort of coming together and cooperation, I feel like a really positive trend in sort of my field of journalism is like the kind of this direction towards cooperative, community sort of grounded local journalism that we've seen emerge over the last 10 years across the UK, sort of pioneered by the Bristol Cable, and then really sort of run with in the form of like Manchester, so with Manchester Meteor and Manchester Mill. And again, like kind of just echo. Say again?
The Mill's not a co-op, is it?
The Mill is not a co-op, but it is, reader funded, and rather than sort of being that wretch PLC model of advertising funded journalism. And I think that's a really positive thing that everyone should be supporting. Basically, independent media, I think it's a green shoot that's emerged out of this pretty hideous political and media landscape, and it's something that everyone should get behind.
Fantastic. And if you love independent media, you can support G&D Media at patreon.com/G&D Media. And for £1 a month, more money than you give to the Donkey Sanctuary, you will get some shit-hot insider climate news that Alex puts together every month. And you'll get to answer questions to lovely guests like Sam in the future. We didn't get any this week because this is a very impromptu podcast, and there's loads of the great stuff on there. And we're just trying to buy some cameras. That's all we want to do. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming and joining us on this wild ride that is British democracy. It's lovely to see you, and we'll join you all in a couple of weeks' time. We've got a brand new government, and hopefully something to give a shit about. Is that where I'll leave it?
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, yeah. All right. Cheers, guys. Bye.
See ya.
We'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon, and a special shout out to our top tier patrons: Barbara Burke, Pierre Munt, Jill Burke, Jolyn Stone, Karen Taylor, Lizzie, Marie-Louise O'Hanrahan, and Steve Smith. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to join these amazing people and support the show, head to patreon.com/G&D Media UK. And if you can't afford to help us out, please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much.